This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, fading Omicron COVID-19 variant worries and a move by China's central bank to inject its second shot of stimulus since July did help to lift world stock markets today. Most emerging market stocks were up, tracking gains in broader markets. We saw MSCI's index of EM stocks jumping 1.5% on the day, benefiting from improving risk sentiment. Now, Nairobi's NSE 20 was up just slightly, but a continued sell-off of blue-chip firms amid rising concerns over the new variant saw the value of stocks on the Nairobi Securities Exchange at a 7-month low today. Now, also coming up on today's show. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa continues his campaign against coronavirus-induced travel restrictions. South Africa's economy shrinks after July protests and coronavirus restrictions. And farmers in Nigeria unravel benefits of breeding snails. Now, the presidents of Senegal and South Africa have condemned the isolation of Southern African nations from the rest of the world. And that, of course, is following the discovery of the Omicron variant. Since South Africa made the announcement that it had found cases of the new variant, numerous countries have rushed to impose travel restrictions against it and, of course, its neighbors.
Isoler un pays qui a séquencé.
Isolating a country that has detected a new variant and has been transparent is not only discriminatory but also counterproductive because it encourages others not to publish the actual results of the investigations. That is the danger. We must continue to work together in solidarity. This pandemic, which is affecting all our countries, must bring us together on the side of solidarity in our response instead of adding a new divide between rich and poor countries.
Entre pays riches et pays pauvres.
When South African scientists discovered, as President Macky Sall was saying, Omicron, the new variant, they immediately took on the responsibility of informing the world, the entire world, that a new variant has come through. And what is the result? The northern countries impose a ban to punish the excellence that comes from Africa. They basically say, we will not allow you to travel around. But lo and behold, Omicron is spreading all over the world.
Now, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa was taking part in the Dakar International Forum on Africa right there in Senegal, where he met his Senegalese counterpart on Tuesday. They engaged in bilateral talks, including the signing of memoranda of agreements between the two countries. They also held closed-door talks for 2 hours. Now, the global economy could suffer a modest blow from the Omicron variant of COVID-19, but economists say the scale of damage will hinge on the potency of the strain itself. Now, stock markets have been roiled amid increased travel restrictions, and for oil exporters such as Nigeria, the discovery of the variant is likely to affect their crude revenues. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with more.
The Omicron strain of the coronavirus has induced massive panic sales of crude oil following concerns of a looming lockdown, a move that caused oil prices to drop from $80 to $72 per barrel. Countries like the UK, USA and Singapore have already begun restating travel restrictions to some affected countries. And experts say that if the situation worsens, slump in the price of crude oil is inevitable.
Once people start to shut down their borders and start to have this, restrictions and movements, and then lockdowns, less amount of energy is utilized in terms of public transport, and that will tend to affect oil production. But be that as it may, oil prices have been high. So I think what will happen is that oil prices will sort of dip a bit. I don't see oil prices going below $50.
Nigeria depends on crude oil for about 90% of its export revenue. The West African nation went into recession in 2020 amid oil price slumps fueled by the global lockdown. OPEC is scheduled to discuss plans to restore crude production cuts it initiated last year, but the oil bloc is weighing its decision after US-led attempts to lower prices.
I think OPEC will be planning against this by making sure that it keeps the production cuts in place, or it will defer that decision to remove the production cuts until next year. So he sees so that he would watch how things play out. But I don't expect OPEC to shift position in terms of removing the production cuts.
Nigeria has been unable to take advantage of higher oil prices. Internal and technical disruptions have kept oil production low. Daily crude oil production stands at an average 1.2 million barrels per day, as against 1.66 million barrels approved by OPEC. Though lower prices may offer an advantage of reduced subsidy payments, it could consequently lead to lower revenue to government's coffers. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Now, of course, it is important to note that South African doctors and experts on Monday suggested that Omicron may be causing less severe clinical symptoms than other coronavirus variants. However, they also cautioned that more research is needed before definitive conclusions can be drawn. Well, let's head to South Africa now. The country's economy contracted by 1.5% in the third quarter of 2021. This is as the country grappled with riots and, of course, a tighter COVID-19 restrictions. Now, a spree of arson and looting rocked parts of South Africa in July. That's following the jailing of ex-President Jacob Zuma for contempt. The country worst hit by COVID-19 in Africa also tightened restrictions in July to tackle a third wave of infections. Trade, catering and accommodation industries fell by 5.5%. Manufacturing shrank by 4.2%, while agricultural activity plunged by 13.6%, marking its biggest drop in 5 years. Well, let's now take apart those numbers further with Angelo Coppola. He joins us in Johannesburg. Angelo, great to have you with us today. Now, of course, analysts are saying that despite 4 successive quarters of growth for the country, they mostly expected this decline that we're seeing today. Give us some insight into the key factors behind this contraction.
Well, Uche, you've mentioned most of them, but it's the quantum of the contraction that's got all the analysts and economists concerned. 1.5% is a sizable drop. As you mentioned, the big drop there contributed to the drop caused by the rioting and the destruction in 2 of the country's 3 economic hubs, that's Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Cape Town and the Western Cape generally missed all that criminal activity. The lockdown did also have an impact there. The top 2 contributors in the contraction, as you mentioned, were trade and manufacturing, and they contribute minus 0.7 and minus 0.5 percentage points there. The issue here was with the agricultural sector, which showed that 13.6% drop. That added minus 0.4% to that 1.5% drop in GDP growth. But that's seen as temporary because of the overall agricultural sector confidence levels, which were measured just recently. And they're at a second highest record they've been since 2001. And economists now are saying that to some extent that downplays the recent challenges in terms of high input costs that we're seeing in that sector. The problem here is, Uche, that we're starting to hear economists suggesting that the economy might contract even more in quarter 4. And we're going to have to wait to see what those numbers show, Uche.
Right. Well, an economic recovery, Angelo, after the July unrest and, of course, those COVID-19 lockdowns, that has been understandably rocky so far. But given that the state has been struggling to implement fundamental economic reforms, of course, after years of sluggish growth in the country, what then is the outlook for growth going forward? What are the political and economic factors that will determine this growth?
Well, Rocky doesn't even begin to cover the issues that are facing the country's government and economists and people and businesses here. One of the key indicators is real job creation, and we know that unemployment data is at record low levels again from the latest data that was released about 10 days ago. It's been fairly consistent. Inflation is under control, which is good news. The interest rates are starting to trend upwards, which may attract some institutional hot money, but that's not good for sustainable economic growth. Foreign direct investment is showing some signs of resurgence, but that's mostly due to Ramaphosa's investment roadshows. And in fact, the Reserve Bank says that FDI increased by around 17.4 billion in Q2 of this year. But we've said this all before, the country isn't short of plans or task teams or investment envoys. We're short on economic growth, and it's unclear where that spark is going to come from. The country's traditional trading partners may help, but the possibilities and opportunities in the African continental free trade area are perhaps the biggest opportunity that the country has to take advantage of. Time's going to tell how business and the state react to that continental market. Uche?
Quite right, Angelo, time will tell. But let's shift focus slightly now, because we know today Parliament was to decide on whether to pass a law that will allow for the expropriation of land without compensation. We've been talking about this for a while. Is there any new information on that?
Well, late this afternoon, that amendment had been booted into touch, to use a rugby analogy. The biggest surprise was in Parliament that 51 votes were not cast. And analysts are suggesting that if those votes had been cast, the ANC might well have got their required majority to carry that amendment through. Interestingly, though, the EFF voted against the amendment in its entirety, and that's despite an alliance that was hyped up when the process was started some 4 years ago. MPs voted along both party political lines generally, except for those 51 votes I've just mentioned, and we don't know who they are because it was a secret ballot. The ANC hasn't commented on their loss just yet, but the opposition parties are very vocal. The EFF saying that they were never going to support a party, as they put it, that was controlled by white minority capital. The DA says the ANC failure is a victory for South Africa's constitutional order. So it's likely back to the drawing board. And as I said, the process lasted some 4 years and cost millions of dollars. And it's likely to see it come back to Parliament in the near future in a slightly different guise.
Well, I'm sure you'll be watching that for us, Angelo. Many thanks for those insights. That, of course, is Angelo Coppola joining us there in Johannesburg. Well, still in South Africa, higher learning institutions are being squeezed out of funds as the government is forced to focus on other areas as it battles the coronavirus pandemic. Now, higher learning institutions in the country, like in many other parts of the world, depend mainly on state funding and tuition fees. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with the details.
Marketing student Tubalinkosi Indebele was full of hope as he neared the end of his studies. But a government-funded bursary was cut in the final year, and he's now left with a sizable debt.
I personally still owe $2,000 that was supposed to be paid off by NSFAS. So it's quite a struggle for a person like me to pay $2,000, especially coming from a family which can barely afford. It's quite a real struggle. So my dad, I came from a single parent. My mother passed away in 2009. So I was left with my dad. My dad isn't employed, he's self-employed.
Indebele's certificate is being held back until his fees are settled. It's hampering his search for employment. But he's sticking with a part-time job at a food stall in the Johannesburg Zoo, which helps him get by.
I started working off at the zoo. It was on my first year. That was in 2018. It started off as a holiday job. It was something just to subside me on the side, help me get something that my parents couldn't get me. It's something that I'm living off right now.
The COVID-19 pandemic has been tough for South Africans. Many are either losing their jobs or becoming poorer, which means they're no longer able to send their children to university or college. Indebele is among hordes of students unable to fork out study fees.
Tuition debt is one of the major challenges that universities are having to deal with, and it's grown quite tremendously over the past say 10 years, and our universities are sitting with this challenge. You know, state funding is not growing as fast as it should grow. Tuition fees is also not growing as fast as it should for them to be able to stay afloat and be able to offer good education.
Government has tried to balance inequalities with free education for lower-income households over the last few years.
The fee-free approach helps with providing access, especially to those who come from households, that cannot afford it. But is it sustainable going forward? The state gets its revenue mainly from taxation, and it depends on how the economy is performing. Also the other demands, healthcare, we're talking COVID, we need to buy vaccines, infrastructure, our roads and all that.
The battle for universities is likely to worsen as they compete against other pressing social issues unless they find innovative ways of raising funding. Julie Shard, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
And now a look at some corporate headlines today. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta has approved a change in law that will allow the central bank to regulate digital lenders. Now, the move is expected to grant the Apex Bank power to rein in lenders who violate consumer privacy. This follows complaints by borrowers who can pay annualized interest rates of more than 100%. Meanwhile, the UK government has been taken to court over its more than $1.1 billion funding of a controversial liquefied natural gas project in Mozambique. Now, the development has been branded a climate-wrecking mega project by the environmental group Friends of the Earth. The group says the project was incorrectly judged to be compatible with the Paris Climate Agreement. It is led by French energy company Total Energies. And in a similar story, Royal Dutch Shell is facing a new legal challenge to its planned seismic survey of South Africa's eastern coastline as local communities seek to halt the program. A group called Sustaining the Wild Coast filed a case last week arguing that Shell doesn't have the appropriate permits. This comes after a high court on Friday dismissed a request for an interdict from a group which includes Greenpeace. And thousands of striking workers at companies under South Africa's Massmart are expected to return to work after reaching an agreement over disputes. The disgruntled workers had been on strike since November 19th over low wages, as well as unilateral restructuring and changes to terms and conditions of their employment. Settlement agreements include an across-the-board wage increase, which is effective July 1st, 2021. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now, still coming up on the show. Egypt to begin selling electricity to Iraq next year. And anxiety amongst Zimbabweans working in South Africa as they face expulsion with the expiry of their work visas.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
View of this front line position.
Welcome back. Well, let's head to Egypt now. The country's cabinet has announced that it will begin exporting power to Iraq in the first quarter of 2022. Now, the electricity line will be linked via Jordan, which already imports power from Egypt from Cairo. Well, here's Yasser Hakim with the details.
Iraq suffers from an acute shortage of power due to decades of infighting and the war on terrorism, which damaged its infrastructure. But as the country embarks on a tough rebuilding process amid increased stability, there is more demand for energy from the Middle Eastern nation.
At its peak, the production of energy reaches 20 to 21,000 megawatts. But there's a huge waste in the range of 6 to 7,000 megawatts caused by inefficiencies in its supply and connection. So the total electricity that reaches people doesn't exceed 15,000 megawatts. It's unfortunate because consumption is in the range of 28,000 megawatts, as most of the year there are high temperatures. The government is desperately trying to cover the difference.
Egypt has stepped in with a deal to supply much-needed power to Iraq through neighboring Jordan. Cairo is keen to accelerate the export of its electricity in this sub-region to make its infrastructure profitable.
مصر حققت فائض كبير جدا في مجال الطاقة الكهربائية.
Egypt has huge natural gas reserves and increasing production levels of renewable energy. This surplus of power allows it to be the main exporter of electricity to the Middle East and Africa. There is also the proper infrastructure for producing energy and to connect and supply energy and electricity with grids linked to the west with Libya, east with Jordan, and south with Sudan, and in the near future with Cyprus to the north.
This strong infrastructure in the North African nation has helped complete the deal with the Arab Asian government. That's as the North African state continues to exploit its huge solar and wind potential.
The cost of this project is $2.2 billion for an electricity link from Cairo to Oman and then to Baghdad. The first stage will export 500 megawatts to Baghdad through Oman and will be doubled to 1 gigawatt. For the short and medium-term strategies, this agreement will quickly fill the deficit in power during the hot summer season and is the basis for a bigger plan for economic growth.
On the long run, however, Baghdad has planned to build power stations with the help of Siemens to produce about 11 gigawatts of electricity. As for Cairo, the deal is another stepping stone in its aspirations to become a regional energy hub.
Egypt is on the verge of being an energy hub through the exporting of gas and electricity. Egypt has an electricity link with Libya and Sudan in Africa, as well as with Cyprus and Greece. There is also an agreement signed with Saudi Arabia.
Syria and Lebanon are also in the pipeline to get energy from Africa's second-largest economy. But experts say the main shift for Egypt will be geared towards exporting energy to the power-hungry European markets, as well as expanding within the African continent. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's shift focus now. From this month, South Africa is not renewing temporary permits of around 250,000 Zimbabweans who are working in the country when their visas expire. Some 250,000 Zimbabweans fleeing political and economic crisis at home were granted 4-year work visas in 2009. Well, the visas have been repeatedly extended, but the government has now announced there will be no further extension. Here's CGTN's Yolisa Njamela with more.
South Africa is the continent's most industrialized economy. As a result, this country is a magnet for economic migrants searching for better job prospects in the region. Some 250,000 Zimbabweans fleeing political and economic crisis back at home also look to South Africa for better opportunities. Many of them were granted special visas for their stay here. They were first granted 4-year work visas in 2009. The visas have for years been repeatedly extended, but the government announced there would be no further extension. About 180,000 Zimbabweans are affected by the special permit issue. They now face an uncertain future as they had not planned to return home permanently anytime soon. Sevius Mazetedze is one of those Zimbabwean nationals living here in South Africa. He came to South Africa a number of years ago in order to ensure the survival of his family.
I couldn't sustain my family. I couldn't look after my family. Although I had a top job with an international IT company, I couldn't look after my family. So all my children, or 2 of my children, were still at primary school level, and my son was at high school, and I couldn't afford to look after the family.
One of Mazetedze's daughters came to South Africa at the tender age of 4. Her father's permit, like others, is expiring on the 31st of December, and there's no guarantee that he would get a different permit to stay here.
This is the only life she knows because she grew up here, her friends are here in South Africa, and also she participates in sport here in South Africa. As for my other daughter also, she started grade 5 here, and most of her friends are here. She participated in hockey at provincial level.
We asked what happens then if he doesn't get any permit once the special permit expires.
We just have to go home. If there's nothing else that we can do from here, then we go home.
The special permit holders are already facing tough times as some South African banks have already sent threatening letters to freeze their accounts if they don't provide new documents in January 2022. But for some unemployed South Africans, the government's decision could not have come at a better time.
I agree with the government that the Zimbabweans without permits should go home so that we here in South Africa, South Africans can be able to grow and get jobs.
Yeah, I think that's going to be safe and better for us to get jobs actually, because of people who doesn't have permits get jobs easily than us who have matrics and stuff like that because of cheap labors and stuff. That is the problem.
Some experts believe that the decision by the South African authorities will likely have a negative effect on the economy.
I think it will have a very deleterious effect on the South African economy, because a lot of Zimbabweans who are in South Africa are very, very what we call, and it's a phrase I do not like, but what we call highly skilled. So meaning that they are bringing very important skills to the South African economy. I think it's an action that will have a very negative effect on the economy for South Africa.
According to the last population census, South Africa hosts more than 2.2 million foreigners, including political refugees, economic migrants, and skilled expatriate workers. Yodisa Njambela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, of course, some families in Zimbabwe are also anxious over fears that their South African-based loved ones who are on those special permits could be forced back home when they expire. Here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya with more.
Paridzawa Fowanaka's 3 sons live and work in South Africa. 2 of them helped build this home in Harare's Dzivarasekwa suburb, which could end up providing a soft landing for them should they be forced back home.
My children don't have any property of their own. If they have to come back, there is no way I will turn them away. My husband and I will have to forgo rentals from the rooms we let out because we can only accommodate our sons and their families.
With scant employment opportunities, her sons may find the going tough back home.
They can try and set up some small businesses, as most people here do now. Even preparing and selling food is one option, but income from such projects is too little to meet the high cost of living.
Diaspora remittances, which topped $1 billion in 2020 and are expected even higher this year, would be cut if a sizable number of Zimbabweans working in South Africa were forced to return back home. So the stakes are also high for the local economy.
A lot of Zimbabweans are based there and they send goods and money back home to their families here. That flow of goods and money is likely to be disrupted, reducing the remittances that are keeping consumer demand going in Zimbabwe in quite a big way.
Even if her sons don't end up being forced back, Wafawanaka sees this as a wake-up call for her children to plan for any contingency.
You can't count on a future in a foreign land. My sons spend a lot of money on rentals, which they could be using to buy land and develop their own homes here.
Zimbabwean nationals have often been the target of xenophobic attacks in South Africa and are blamed by some for depriving them of job and business opportunities. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Meanwhile, Tanzania's government has called for more concerted action to combat global warming in order to protect Mount Kilimanjaro's glaciers. Now, this comes as the Tanzania National Parks Authority has organized a 300-person trip to summit Mount Kilimanjaro to mark 60 years of the country's independence on Thursday. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
It's the highest single freestanding mountain in the world, and it forms a centerpiece of many trips to Tanzania.
A holiday in Tanzania is not complete
if you're able to achieve it, then it's not complete without climbing Kilimanjaro. Now, others climb it for the sheer for the sheer objective of, yes, I've done this. And for other people, especially the adventure seekers, this is something that they've been planning for many years.
Experts estimate that Mount Kilimanjaro has lost about 80% of its glacial ice. A World Meteorological Organization report suggests that glaciers on top of Mount Kilimanjaro, as well as other African mountains, are melting and could disappear by 2040. This could impact the livelihoods of more than 1 million Tanzanians who depend on the mountain for survival. Being a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Tanzanian government says more work needs to be done to protect the mountain.
And we should sensitize the world to play its part to reduce the impact of climate change so that Mount Kilimanjaro is back to where it is. We believe we are going to be there.
The Kilimanjaro National Park Authority has been tasked with protecting the mountain as a tourist destination. It usually attracts 60,000 climbers each year.
We have been undertaking some restoration programs, and through these restoration programs, we have been planting indigenous trees. So in case the area is degraded, maybe due to human activities or maybe due to fire, we usually plant indigenous trees in order to accelerate the forest recovery and the overall succession process.
People who work in tourism hope that as climbers hit the summit on the Day of Independence, it will highlight the need for more action, and that efforts will increase to protect the mountain's glaciers from melting further. They believe that will conserve the flora and fauna that covers the mountain and the livelihood of the millions that depend on it. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Moshi, Tanzania.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now. Still to come. China holds its annual dialogue with 6 major economic and financial organizations. And 5G technology allows major Chinese hospitals to share expertise remotely. Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
And now a look at other headlines this hour. At least 38 people have been killed in a prison fire in Burundi's capital, Gitega. The facility is said to have a capacity of 400, but was housing over 1,500 inmates when the incident occurred. Now, witnesses say the blaze started at 4 a.m. local time when most of the prisoners were still asleep. Most of the victims are elderly inmates. Back in August, a fire broke out at the same facility. And in Sudan, the deputy head of the country's sovereign council, Lieutenant General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, has met with officials from the United Nations. Now, Dagalo has praised the cooperation between Sudan and the United Nations in regard to the country's ongoing transition. Volker Perez, the head of the United Nations integrated mission to support the transition in Sudan, stressed the need to move in the direction of a legitimate democratic transition to achieve free and fair elections. And still in Sudan, the trial of ousted Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir kicked off in Khartoum on Tuesday, but is facing a legal challenge. According to Bashir's defense team, part of the prosecution panel were deliberately absent from court sessions to delay the case and to prolong the detention of the accused. Now, members of the prosecution are amongst those affected by the military's decision to dissolve the Sovereign Council and the Council of Ministers. And the Chinese embassy in South Sudan has launched a second phase of a China-aided technical cooperation project to help support development of education in the country. South Sudan has one of the lowest literacy rates in the world, with only 37% of its population able to read and to write. And that's a recap of other headlines this hour. Well, let's turn our attention to international news. China has held its annual dialogue with 6 major economic and financial organizations, including the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Now, dubbed the 1+6 Roundtable, the session was led virtually by Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. Discussions focused on promoting strong, inclusive and sustainable growth of the world economy. Here's Wang Xuan with more.
From recovery to restructuring, the world's second-largest economy and the 6 major global institutions have held talks on ways to revive the economy amid and after the COVID-19 pandemic. For its part, China made commitments for high-quality development through policies aimed at reforming and opening up its economy.
We hope to remain a popular destination for foreign investments. We will treat all enterprises equally and create a good environment for them to invest and prosper. Market access for foreign investors will further be eased. We will also work hard to facilitate the enforcement of the biggest free trade area shaped by the RCEP deal next year. We will also be active in our goals to join the CPTPP. China will work hard for steady and sustainable growth for the long run. We intend to press ahead with our plans to reform and open up.
China says some of its support policies and proposals are already bearing some fruit, and that sparked some optimism in the international community.
We discussed the importance of global macroeconomic policies and noted the just announced reduction in China's RRR. This RRR and limited growth in bank reserves has been a foundation of monetarism in achieving stability in currencies and prices.
Leaders at the roundtable acknowledged that the road to global recovery is not an easy one, especially with current challenges such as climate change. To address them, they are calling for urgent action. In light of the pandemic, they say the priority now is to boost vaccinations.
We warmly welcome any efforts to boost and to accelerate the global rollout of vaccines, in that it will help boost the public health and indeed help secure a sustained recovery.
Attendees also promised to take on more responsibilities, especially for less developed countries and the difficulties they face. As the world recovers from COVID-19, many say cooperation between countries is crucial to solve the crisis. China has also made commitments to continue the dialogue with major international economic institutions and is aiming to drive the global economy through sustainable growth. Wang Suwen, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, let's head to Australia now, where low interest rates are helping drive house prices to record levels in most major cities in the country. But researchers warn that the country's runaway housing market is also driving inequality and becoming an increasing risk to the nation's economy. Here's Greg Navarro telling us more.
Selling a home in Sydney has rarely been more profitable.
In the last year, the price rises
in the sort of wake of the worst of the pandemic have been at a level which has been quite extraordinary.
Sydney has experienced the biggest increase. The median house price jumped 30% in just 12 months. Many cities are seeing the steepest rises in more than 3 decades.
Have to be around 2.1 or better.
Record low interest rates are driving a rush to secure home loans and helping to create what appears to be a post-pandemic economic driver. University of New South Wales professor Hal Pawson sees it much differently.
Housing is really an unproductive asset, and we're sinking, really as a country, we're sinking far too much money, too much debt. We're committing too much of our income to paying for that debt on a product that doesn't really create a lot of employment and knock-on economic activity beyond itself.
The dream of home ownership is slipping away for an increasing number of people.
If we have a growing gap between people who have a lot of wealth and people who are doing ordinary jobs but who are unable to sort of, take advantage of the benefits of home ownership, then that grows all sorts of social divisions.
Housing advocates say higher income families are moving to regional areas in search of larger properties. There's been a long-held belief that Australia's housing market is fueled by a lack of adequate supply, meaning there simply aren't enough houses in many cities, including here in Sydney. But over the last couple of years, the country's international borders have remained closed, and the migration tap has essentially been turned off. Housing advocates want the federal government to scrap outdated policies originally designed decades ago to encourage property investment through tax concessions. Pawson says Australia needs to adopt a national housing strategy. Otherwise, he says, skyrocketing house prices will continue to come with the kind of costs that no one can really afford. Rag Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
And heading to Japan now, it is one of the top countries in terms of food waste. Well, the government now aims to reduce around 120,000 tons of food loss and waste every year. However, analysts say the current system is hindering the process, but some see a business opportunity in food waste reduction. Here's Terence Terashima reporting.
It is estimated that Japan generates over 25 million tons of food waste a year. Approximately 6 million tons are edible. Analysts attribute this to a strict food sanitation law which sets a dual expiry date for products. One is a taste best if used by date, and the second is recommended to consume by date. Experts say the taste best if used by date is set much earlier than necessary. Most of the food products are edible days or weeks after the date's written on the label. Some Japanese are confused by these dual expiry dates, and the fact that the Japanese tend to favor fresher food products also plays a role in food loss.
I think Japan's expiry date policy is too strict. Most of the products are perfectly edible for weeks after that. I do not know exactly what's driving this image, but many Japanese think these products are not edible after the first expiry date, which is only advising that it tastes best before the written date.
Manufacturers tend to discard products before the expiry dates. Eco-Eat supermarket buys products nearing expiration or those that are expired but still safe to consume and sells them at a low price. They're hoping to reduce food waste and promote public awareness about what is edible and what is not. Over 8,000 products line the shelves, and most are still good for weeks, despite the dates printed on them. Eco-Eat isn't the only company trying to tackle Japan's food waste. Koichi Takahashi also saw an opportunity to turn the problem of food waste into a business. It took him 3 decades to set up Japanese Food Ecology Center. The company plays a dual role in industrial waste disposal and producing food for pig farms across Japan.
When I was starting to become a veterinarian, I heard that many farms rely on expensive imported livestock feed, while we waste tons of perfectly edible food every year. For decades, I have thought about how to make use of the food waste and turn it into the business to provide cheaper and safer feed for livestock farms.
The company receives about 35 tons of unsold food or food waste from manufacturers and supermarkets daily and turn them into approximately 42 tons of fermented liquid feed. The feed is catered to the needs of each farm.
If we can dispose of the food waste for a cheaper price or about the same cost to incinerate it, and in turn provides farms with livestock feed that is cheaper than the imported grains, it would help the companies not to waste food, and the farms would save money on feed. At the same time, we make a profit from disposing of and producing livestock feed. I think it's a stable business model.
Takahashi said this business model also has a potential to ease district government spending on waste disposal and reduce massive food waste in Japan. The company hopes to expand the technology to producing biomass fuel using food waste for renewable energy. Terence Teshima, CGTN, Tokyo.
Well, let's head now to southwest China's Chengdu, where a major hospital is teaming up with the country's largest mobile service provider to offer medical services remotely. And of course, 5G technology is making that possible. Here's Dai Kai with more.
For people living in China's small towns, seeing the country's best doctors usually requires traveling long distances to cities like Beijing and Shanghai. Besides costing money, it takes time, something patients with severe illnesses cannot afford.
Hospitals are used to dealing with emergencies. When it comes to critical cases, every second counts. And transferring patients to some of the best doctors is not always possible when treatment is needed immediately. 5G technology can help narrow that gap by making remote diagnosis and surgery possible. Experts say its growing presence in the medical community could completely shift the way healthcare is delivered.
The West China Hospital in Chengdu is one of the leading medical institutions in the southwest. It has teamed up with China Mobile to explore how cutting-edge technology can empower the medical industry. 2 doctors are providing step-by-step instructions to surgeons 20 kilometers away who are performing a tracheotomy on a 68-year-old patient.
Due to the low latency characteristics of 5G, it can transmit our instructions to the medical staff operating remotely in real time, and we can have them terminate any moves at any time without delay, which can effectively reduce risks in surgeries with a very small puncture space, such as tracheotomy.
Medical instructions aside, physicians think 5G can help with early detection of hidden health risks.
We've been saying build an ICU without boundaries so we can detect patients with potentially severe illnesses as early as possible. The conditions of patients change rapidly, which means if the data transmitted from their end to ours gets delayed, that affects our judgment. 5G helps us to better analyze and diagnose more accurately and quickly.
China Mobile initiated the plan to advance healthcare back in 2018, and they had the sense from the outset that 5G's high bandwidth and low latency perfectly fit the time-critical needs of intensive care units.
China Mobile hopes that 5G plus digitization will facilitate the balancing of resources in the medical industry, empower the grassroots hospitals in the central and western regions, and improve their medical efficiency by leveraging the best medical resources of China's top-tier hospitals, so that patients can get quality medical resources right at their doorstep.
Kang says the pandemic has helped to facilitate remote diagnosis and treatment, and it can be replicated in other medical scenarios.
When we further expand it, the quality medical resources of top echelon hospitals nationwide can be rapidly applied by grassroots hospitals. And this model is not limited by time or space. Letting every critically ill patient access the treatment they need can become a reality.
Medical experts say in addition to 5G, other advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence and cloud computing can also create new, life-saving possibilities in healthcare. 戴凯义 CGTN 成都 Sichuan Province.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at commodity markets today. Oil prices extending gains. That's after a rebound of almost 5% previously. Concerns about the impact of the Omicron coronavirus variant on global fuel demand eased today, and Iran nuclear talks also stalled. delaying the return of Iranian crude to the market, and that certainly helped prices today. Meanwhile, gold edging lower, weighed down by firmer U.S. Treasury yields, and of course bets that the U.S. Fed could tighten policy more aggressively ahead of inflation data, which we expect later this week. Well, let's take a short break now, still coming up. We take a look at why snail farming is catching on in Nigeria.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Now, the giant African snail is sought after in parts of the world for its nutritional and its cosmetic benefits. Well, in Nigeria, some entrepreneurs have found opportunities by selling the mollusks, which are said to be low in cholesterol and high in protein. Well, as CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam now reports, many Nigerians are cashing in on the ease of farming snails to earn a living.
33-year-old Oko Agbahi heading to his farm for routine inspection of his snails. In his 10 years as a heliculturist, Oko has groomed over 20,000 snails on his farm. Over the years, he's grown a full-blown value chain of snail farming, including exports, feed production, and consulting.
The beautiful thing about heliculture and snail farming is that the demand by far exceeds supply. That's why we go into a lot of trainings and consulting to get as many people as possible on board.
For many years, Nigeria's appetite for snails has been served through traditional means of handpicking from the bushes. But as the demand for this nutrient-packed protein continues to rise, more people are going into snail farming to cash in on the gains. It's one of the cheapest and most cost-effective livestock farming, yet with high profits.
For the average snail farmer that starts with maybe 100 snails, in 12 to 18 months, you might have more than 10 times the capacity of the initial stock you started with. So profitability is very encouraging as long as management practices are top-notch.
Apart from creating employment and earning opportunities for many, snail farming is helping to grow Nigeria's economy. The slime is particularly beneficial for the beauty and pharmaceutical industries.
Science and technology had gone into the enhancement of snail farming to the extent that now you can extract that slime, the slimy part of the snail without killing the snail. And that slimy part of the snail is a huge product used for pharmaceutical and cosmetic products. So, going beyond table for food and looking at the other value chain and byproducts of snail is where the real wealth creation in snail farming is found.
From a wide range of proteins on display in restaurants snails are usually preferred.
Aside the dietary benefits, people find snails quite desirable for their delicious taste, especially spicy and stewed, like this one. But they don't come cheap. A piece costs roughly $5, and many would go out of their way to give themselves a treat. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, Tanzania's 60-year independence anniversary was the central theme at the 14th edition of the Swahili Fashion Week, which was held in the country's commercial capital of Dar es Salaam. Now, the three-day fashion extravaganza brought together fashion and accessory designers from the East and Central Africa region and beyond. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more on that.
For the last 14 of Tanzania's 60 years of independence, the Swahili Fashion Week has strived to be the center of African fashion. This year, 92 designers from Swahili-speaking countries and beyond are showcasing their talent. Organizers argue the COVID-19 pandemic has allowed the event to become the largest fashion show in Africa.
There are virtual events, but with a limited number of designers, showcases in other countries from 5 days to 2 days. So that's why this gave us an opportunity to become the biggest because of COVID, because we did not have lockdown.
At this event, 64 local designers, 10 emerging designers and 18 foreign ones are showcasing and marketing their work. Many of them believe the event is critical for their growth as designers.
It's really good and important for designers to have an opportunity to showcase their work in a professional setting, because then they get to hone and fine-tune their work and to sort of step back and see it outside of themselves.
Top designers in different categories are also being awarded for their work. Organizers hope the recognition will help advance their careers and help translate their art into incomes.
Designers from the US, Oman, Spain and Italy are joining designers from East and Central Africa in showcasing their work for an international audience.
Those in attendance at the event say they see the show's impact.
Colors, how you mix in special designers, we don't don't fear to experiment with combinations of colors, we don't follow like strictly rules of fashion industry.
This show opens up the world for models and designers because it's the big show that's watched all over Africa. It becomes easier. If you have something nice, it's the place to sell it. It's a show that really helps even those who are starting off today.
Despite the strides made over many years, organizers feel more needs to be done to gain the kind of international recognition they desire. They hope that with each year of staging the show, they get closer to making African fashion truly global. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, before we leave you today, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. And of course, South Africa's rand gaining 0.1% ahead of those third quarter GDP data that showed the economy contracted quarter on quarter following civil unrest over the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma during that quarter. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.